The smell of cedar and old paint hit different at 5 a.m. Not because it was pleasant, because it was a reminder. Every plank of that house, every window frame, every door hinge, every inch of crown molding running along the ceiling of the living room had been touched by the same pair of hands, rough hands, patient hands, hands that had once held a woman named Delia while she took her last breath in a Houston hospital bed, and then, 3 months later, had picked up a hammer and refused to stop until something permanent existed in the world. That man's name was Wendell Croft, 67 years old, retired civil servant, former senior supervisor at the Harris County Infrastructure Office, where for 31 years he had overseen the building of bridges, drainage systems, and public roads across southeast Texas. A man who had watched Houston grow from a mid-sized southern city into one of the wealthiest, most complicated places in America, and had contributed quietly to the bones underneath all of it. And now? Now he was standing in the kitchen of the house he built with his own hands, holding a mop. Not because the floor was dirty, because his daughter-in-law Ravenna had told him to mop it before breakfast. Wendell's son was named Prescott Croft, 34 years old, sales director at a commercial real estate firm in the Galleria district. Nice suit, nice car. A black Cadillac Escalade he'd upgraded twice in 4 years. The kind of man who walked into rooms and got handshakes from people he'd never met because he carried himself like someone who had always been comfortable. Which was the lie. Because 13 years ago, Prescott Croft had been a 19-year-old boy sitting in a shared apartment near Texas Southern University, eating ramen out of a pot because his campus meal plan had run out and payday wasn't for 6 more days. It was Wendell who had driven 2 hours from Beaumont to bring him groceries. It was Wendell who had signed the private loan that paid for Prescott's last 2 years when the financial aid dried up. It was Wendell who, after Delia passed, had looked at his own retirement fund. Money he and Delia had spent 20 years building together, and quietly transferred a portion of it to cover the down payment on the house, where Prescott and Ravenna now lived. The house Wendell had also built with his own hands over 14 months, mostly on weekends, because the structural upgrades alone would have cost another $40,000, and Wendell knew how to do them himself. He never put a number on any of it. That was his first mistake. Ravenna Croft. Born Ravenna Kessler, raised in a gated community in Scottsdale, Arizona. Was 31 years old, sharp-tongued, and had a talent so specific it was almost impressive. She could make a person feel invisible while looking directly at them. She had married Prescott 4 years ago at a venue in the hill country that cost more than most people's cars. Wendell had attended in his best suit, the charcoal one with the thin lapels that Delia had picked out. He had danced at the reception. He had cried quietly when Prescott read his vows because there was something in his son's eyes that night that reminded him of the boy who used to sit on the porch in Beaumont and ask questions about how bridges stayed up. For the first year, Ravenna had been polite. Not warm, but polite. By the second year, after Wendell moved in following a minor health scare, polite became optional. He just sits around. That was how she said it at the neighborhood barbecue on Glenhurst Lane, standing near the folding table with a white wine spritzer, talking to their neighbor Colette Marsh like Wendell wasn't 10 feet away moving chairs. We're the ones actually keeping things going, and he just sits around. Colette had glanced over at Wendell with an unreadable expression. Wendell had kept moving chairs. But here is what Ravenna was doing at the same time. In the same house, in the slow and patient way that certain people operate, she was building a version of Wendell inside Prescott's head. A version that didn't match the man who had driven through a rainstorm with groceries. A version assembled from small daily deposits. Your father told me the way I run the kitchen is wrong. She had asked Wendell if he thought the spice rack was organized efficiently. He had shrugged and said, "Back in my day, we kept the salt and pepper near the stove." That was the full conversation. He questions every decision you make. He doesn't respect our marriage. Wendell had asked Prescott once if the water bill seemed high, because he'd noticed a faucet dripping in the downstairs bathroom and wanted to fix it. Your father is draining us, Prescott, emotionally, financially. This one she let breathe. She didn't argue it or push it. She just let it sit in a quiet room between the two of them after dinner until Prescott started doing his own math. Wendell didn't know any of this. He was too busy being useful. Every morning at 5 a.m., he was up before anyone else. He made coffee. Not for himself first, but for the whole house. He took out the trash before Prescott had to think about it. He fixed things without being asked. The loose step on the back deck, the bathroom faucet, the garage door sensor that had been stuttering for 3 months. When the yard needed attention, he was the one in the Houston heat pulling weeds along the side fence. Not because anyone told him to, but because it was his way of saying, "I am still here, I am still useful, I still deserve to be part of this." Ravenna never acknowledged any of it. She left notes instead, handwritten on post-its in the kitchen, precise and cold. The mop is in the hall closet. The floors need to be done before 7. Please don't leave your things in the living room. We have guests coming Friday. Dinner is at 6:30. If you're not here, we won't be saving a plate. That last one. Read that last one again. We won't be saving a plate. In the house this man built. The first Friday of October, Ravenna's college friend Blythe Davenport flew in from Atlanta. Blythe was polished, loud in the way that expensive women sometimes are, and she had strong opinions about interior design. She arrived with a rolling suitcase and a bottle of Veuve Clicquot, and immediately filled the living room with laughter. Wendell had come downstairs to greet her. "Oh, this is Prescott's father," Ravenna said. "Not my father-in-law, not this is Wendell, just this is Prescott's father." Like he was a category, a footnote. Blythe smiled the smile of someone who had been briefed. "Oh, right, of course, nice to meet you." Wendell smiled back and went upstairs. That night he ate alone in his room, not because he was told to, because the table was set for 3. But here's the thing about Wendell Croft that Ravenna had not yet understood. The man had not spent 67 years on this earth, had not buried a wife and built a house and raised a son and watched Houston grow, without developing a certain kind of knowledge. Not book knowledge, not street knowledge, people knowledge. He saw everything. He saw the way Blythe's eyes tracked the house, cataloguing it the way a real estate agent does. He saw the way Prescott straightened his posture when Ravenna spoke in front of guests, adjusting himself to match her version of their life. He saw the post-it on the refrigerator that morning that had said in Ravenna's handwriting, "Dad, bathroom needs cleaning before Blythe arrives." Not "could you please," not "when you get a chance." Dad, bathroom, cleaning, like a work order. He had cleaned it. And then, quietly, without saying a word to anyone, he had made a small decision. 3 weeks after Blythe's visit, on a Sunday afternoon when Houston was doing that thing it does in late October, where the air finally breaks and the heat pulls back and everything smells like cut grass and distant rain. Wendell knocked on Prescott's home office door. Prescott looked up from his laptop. He had the same jaw as Wendell, the same wide forehead, but the eyes were different now, guarded in a way they hadn't been before. "Can we talk?" Wendell said. Prescott closed the laptop halfway. "I've got a call in 20 minutes. "This won't take long." He sat down across from his son and, because Wendell Croft had never been a man who wrapped hard things in soft paper, he said it directly. "I don't know what she's told you about me, but I'm asking you, man to man, to hear me out." Something moved across Prescott's face, a flicker, then it closed off. "She hasn't told me anything that isn't true," Prescott said. "Son, you've done enough, Dad." He said it quietly, almost gently, which made it worse. "You did a lot for us, and we appreciate it, but this is my house. Let me run it." Silence. Not the movie kind, the real kind. The kind where a man's chest fills with something that doesn't have a name, because the word betrayal is too simple for what it feels like when your own child looks at you like a problem that's been managed. Wendell stood up. He didn't argue. He didn't list everything he'd done. He didn't pull out a single receipt. He just said, "All right." and walked out. That night, Wendell sat by the window of his room. The room that had been built as a master guest suite that he had personally installed recessed lighting in because Delia had always wanted recessed lighting. And he prayed, not loudly. Wendell wasn't a loud man with God. He said, just above a whisper, "May this house know peace, even if I am not welcome in it." And then he opened his Bible to a passage he hadn't read in years, not because he needed comfort, because he needed to remember who he was before the world inside this house convinced him he was nothing. The next morning, earlier than usual, just past 4:30, Wendell was in the kitchen when he heard movement outside the front door. He looked through the side window. A boy, maybe 9 or 10 years old, skinny, a backpack too large for his frame, the kind the school district issues. The kid was sitting on the bottom step of the porch, eating something out of his palm in the dark. Wendell watched for a moment, then opened the door. The boy looked up, startled. "What are you eating?" Wendell asked. The boy showed him a single granola bar, half gone. "That's breakfast?" The boy shrugged in the particular way children shrug when they've learned not to complain. Wendell went back inside, came back 2 minutes later with a plate. Scrambled eggs, 2 slices of toast, orange juice in a plastic cup. The boy stared at it. "Sit, eat." Wendell sat on the step beside him. His name was Darnell. He lived 4 houses down with his grandmother. He walked to school this early because the school library opened at 6 and it was the only place he could charge his tablet. They sat there in the pre-dawn quiet of Memorial Park, an old man and a 9-year-old eating in the dark while the rest of the neighborhood slept. When Darnell finished and stood to go, he said, "Thank you, Mr. Wendell." "Thank you, Mr. Wendell." He watched the boy walk down the sidewalk until the dark swallowed him. Then he went inside, washed the plate, and started the coffee for a house that hadn't thanked him in months. The invitation arrived on a Wednesday. Printed, heavy cardstock, the kind that costs money to produce. The Croft family invites you to celebrate the 5th anniversary of their home, a gathering of friends and family. Saturday, October 28th, 4 p.m. Wendell found his copy on the kitchen counter, propped against the fruit bowl. He noticed immediately that his name was not on the invitation, not as a host, not as a guest, not as anything. It said, the Croft family. He was a Croft. He stood there for a long time, holding the card in both hands. Then he set it down, gently, and went to his room to press his good shirt. The charcoal one, with the thin lapels. The one Delia had picked. Saturday came in with a sky the colour of a new coin, that particular pale gold you only get in Texas in October, when the light sits low and everything looks like a painting that hasn't dried yet. By 3 o'clock, cars were lining Glenhurst Lane. Neighbours came, colleagues from Prescott's firm, Ravenna's friends from the Junior League, the Davenports who had driven in from Katy, the Hendersons from 2 streets over, a city council member named Brentwood Hale, who Prescott had been cultivating for a potential commercial zoning deal, a photographer hired. The house looked stunning, because Wendell had spent 2 days cleaning it. Not because he was asked to, because it was his house, and he still had pride. Ravenna moved through the party like someone who had practiced moving through parties, laughing at the right moments, touching people's arms, refilling glasses before anyone asked. She was good at this, genuinely good. In a different life, in a different story, she might have been someone worth admiring. Wendell stood near the back of the yard, near the cedar fence he had installed himself, and watched. A man named Aldous Fitch, old friend of Wendell's from the Harris County days, now retired and living in the Heights, found him there. "Wendell!" Aldous grabbed his hand in both of his and shook it the way old men shake hands when they actually mean it. "Man, I didn't know you were living here. This is your boy's place." "Built it myself," Wendell said. Aldous looked at the house. Really looked at it. "You built this?" 14 months, weekends. Aldous let out a low whistle. "This thing is a masterpiece, man. This is... Wendell, this is real work." For the first time in months, something in Wendell's face moved. Not a smile exactly, more like a man who had been underwater briefly surfacing. Then Ravenna appeared. "Aldous, so glad you could make it." She slid between them, like smoke. "Have you tried the crab cakes? Prescott's firm catered. They brought in someone from the Galleria." She guided Aldous away. Wendell watched her go. He understood then, with the full, clear understanding of someone who has been patient long enough, what was happening. She wasn't just rude, she wasn't just difficult. She was managing, curating, building a version of this house and this family and this story where Wendell Croft was a footnote, an obligation, a burden the Crofts graciously carried, and she was good at it. But even the best managers in the world can't control the moment when the truth decides to stand up. It happened near the food table. Dinner was being served. Catered plates, the kind with the little garnish that nobody eats. Ravenna was directing people to the buffet line playing hostess when Wendell walked up calmly and picked up a plate. She was already talking to the city councilman, Brentwood Hale, and 2 women from the junior league. She looked at Wendell, then at the plate in his hand, then back at her guests. And she said, not quietly, not in a whisper, with a light laugh, the kind designed to land like a joke, "Oh, we actually prepared these for the guests first. You can get yours after, okay?" A beat of silence. Councilman Brentwood Hale blinked. One of the junior league women looked at the floor. Wendell held the plate. And then, something happened that Ravenna had not planned for. Aldous Fitch, who was standing 6 feet away with a glass of iced tea, turned around. 2 of Wendell's former colleagues from Harris County, men in their late 60s who had been invited because Prescott still needed infrastructure connections, set down their drinks. The photographer, who had been shooting candids near the rosebed, lowered her camera. The yard got quiet the way yards get quiet when a crowd collectively realizes that something real is happening. Not party real, not performance real, but actual real. Wendell set the plate down on the table. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't reach for drama. Wendell Croft had never been that kind of man. He simply turned and looked at his son, who was standing 15 feet away, frozen between his wife and his guests, and he said, clear enough for the whole yard to hear, "Prescott." Just that, just his son's name, and then he waited. The yard was so quiet you could hear the ice melting in the glasses. 34 people standing in a Houston October evening, holding catered plates and expensive drinks, watching a 67-year-old man wait for his son to remember who he was. Prescott didn't move. That was the answer. Not words, not a gesture, just stillness. The particular stillness of a man who has been so thoroughly reshaped by someone else's version of reality that he no longer recognizes the original. Wendell looked at his son for exactly 4 seconds. Then he nodded. Once, slowly. The way a man nods when a door he hoped was still open finally confirms that it isn't. He walked inside. The kitchen was empty. The caterers had moved everything outside. The overhead light was on, casting that flat, honest glow that kitchens have when the party is somewhere else and the room is just a room again. Wendell stood at the counter. His counter, the one he had measured and cut and installed over a single weekend while Delia was still alive and had stood right there drinking sweet tea and telling him it was crooked, and he had told her it was not crooked, and she had laughed and said, "Baby, I have 2 eyes," and he had laughed too and measured it again, and she had been right. He stood at that counter and put both hands flat on the surface and breathed. Not dramatically, not for show. There was nobody watching. Just a man, alone in the kitchen he built, deciding what kind of man he was going to be for the next 10 minutes. Wendell could walk upstairs, pack his bag, leave quietly with his dignity intact but his silence permanent, and let the house he built belong to people who had forgotten what it cost. Or he could walk back outside, not in anger, not in bitterness, but as himself, fully, completely, without apology, and let the truth do what truth does when you finally stop holding it back. He picked up the charcoal jacket from the chair by the door, put it on, smoothed the lapels, and walked back out. The yard had not recovered from the silence. People were talking again, because people always fill silence with noise. But it was that uncomfortable party talk, the kind where everyone is half listening and half watching the situation they're pretending not to have witnessed. Ravenna was back in hostess mode, moving fast, laughing a little too easily. Prescott was by the drink table talking to a colleague, holding his glass with both hands the way people do when they want to look occupied. Aldous Fitch was standing near the cedar fence where Wendell had left him. When he saw Wendell come back outside in the jacket, he straightened up. Wendell walked to the center of the yard. Not loudly, not with a scene. He simply stood there and waited. It took about 15 seconds for the conversations to slow, for heads to turn, for the photographer, who had an instinct for the moment a gathering changes temperature, to raise her camera again. Ravenna noticed first. Her smile didn't fall. That was the impressive part. She was too practiced for that. She just recalibrated. Walked toward him with a glass of water extended like a peace offering, voice light. "Wendell, can I get you—" "I'd like to say something," Wendell said. Not loud, perfectly conversational, but when a man who has been silent for months suddenly decides to speak in a yard full of people, even the crickets stop. Ravenna stopped. Prescott turned. Brentwood Hale, the city councilman, who had been a public servant long enough to recognize when a room shifts from social to historical, set down his fork. Wendell looked around the yard slowly, not dramatically, just looking. The way a man looks at something he made, really looks at it before he says what it is. "I want to thank everyone for coming tonight," he said. "This is a beautiful house, and it should be celebrated." A few people nodded. Someone started to smile, thinking this was going to be a toast. It was not a toast. "I built it," Wendell said. Simple, flat, like a fact being placed on a table. Not metaphorically, not as an expression. "I built this house with my hands. Every room, every wall. The deck you're standing on? I poured that foundation on a Saturday in July when it was 104 degrees because I wanted it level. The crown molding in the living room I installed that because my wife Delia had always wanted crown molding and she didn't live to see this house finished, so I finished it for her." The yard was completely still. Ravenna's face had not moved, but her left hand, holding the wineglass, had tightened. "I paid for my son's last 2 years of college when the financial aid ran out. I co-signed the loan on this property. I transferred money from mine and Delia's retirement account for the down payment. I have never, not once, put a number on any of that because I didn't do it for credit." He paused. "But I will not stand in the house I built and be told to wait for my plate." Aldous Fitch let out a slow breath. The two former Harris County colleagues, men named Everett Polk and Garrison Buell, who had worked with Wendell for 20 combined years, looked at each other. One of the Junior League women had put her hand over her mouth. Prescott had not moved. His face was the color of someone who has just heard a sound they cannot explain and is waiting to understand it. Ravenna moved first. "That's—" She laughed. The practiced laugh, the social recovery laugh. "Wendell, I think you're misremembering some of the details of the finance—" "Ravenna." It was Prescott. She stopped. Something in his voice had changed. Not angry, not loud, something quieter and more dangerous than either of those things. "What loan?" he said. She blinked. "What?" "Dad said he co-signed a loan. I handled the financing on this house. I know what documents I signed." He set down his glass. "What loan is he talking about?" The silence that followed was a different kind of silence. This one had edges. Here is something about lies that live inside a marriage. They are always housed somewhere physical, a document, an email, a phone call someone half remembers, a signature on a line that was never fully explained. Ravenna had known about the loan. She had been there the day the paperwork was finalized at the title company on Westheimer. She had smiled at the title agent, complimented her blazer, and signed her name on the line marked co-borrower spouse. She had known in that office that Wendell Croft's name was also on those documents, as guarantor. She had simply never mentioned it to Prescott. Because a man who knows his father guaranteed his mortgage is a man who might feel differently about treating that father like a problem. Prescott looked at his wife. Ravenna looked at the 34 people standing in their yard. And in that moment, this moment, right here, was where her particular talent failed her. Because she had always managed Wendell in private, in quiet, in small, controlled doses where she could steer the narrative before it had oxygen. This was not private. This was 34 people and a photographer and a city councilman and 2 men who had worked with Wendell Croft for 20 years and knew exactly what kind of man he was. "We can talk about the details inside," she started. "Garrison," Wendell said. Garrison Buell stepped forward. "I was with him at the credit union the day he got that cashier's check," Garrison said. Calm, certain. The voice of a man who has nothing to protect and no reason to lie. "November, 7 years ago. I drove him. He didn't want Prescott to know the full amount because he didn't want the boy to feel like he owed him." Another silence. Prescott made a sound that wasn't quite a word. Everett Pope cleared his throat and added, "The infrastructure work on the back drainage system on this lot. Wendell did that in exchange for a reduction in contractor fees. Saved your build close to $22,000. I know because I helped him spec it." The information landed like stones in water, one after another, each sending out rings. Ravenna looked at her husband. Her husband was looking at his father. His father was looking at nothing in particular, just standing in the centre of the yard in Delia's jacket, with his hands at his sides, as still and solid as the cedar fence he had installed. "Why didn't you tell me?" Prescott said. His voice cracked on the last word. Just slightly, just enough. Wendell turned to look at his son. "Because you were building your life," Wendell said. "I didn't want you carrying my sacrifice like a debt. I wanted you to feel like you did it yourself." Prescott's jaw tightened. "She told me—" He stopped, started again. "She said you were trying to control things, that you resented our independence, that you—" He exhaled hard. "I believed her." Ravenna took a step forward. "Prescott, this is not the place to—" "You knew about the loan?" Not a question. She opened her mouth. "You knew," he said again, quiet, precise, like a man using a scalpel instead of a hammer. "You sat in that office, you signed next to his name, you knew exactly what my father put on the line for this house, and you never—" "I was protecting our marriage." "From what?" His voice rose for the first time, just slightly, just enough for the yard to hear it. "From gratitude? From knowing the truth about my own father?" Ravenna's composure, the thing she had spent 4 years building and maintaining and deploying like a weapon, slipped. Not dramatically. But everyone in that yard saw it. Her eyes went sharp and then, for just a moment, scared. Because she had run the scenario wrong. She had counted on Prescott's silence, on his need to appear in control, on his pride, which she had always known was larger than his curiosity. She had not counted on his father standing in the centre of a yard full of witnesses and speaking the truth plainly, without drama, without bitterness, in a way that sounded so obviously, undeniably real that there was nothing to argue against. Wendell looked at Ravenna. And here is what he did not do. He did not shout. He did not list every cruelty. He did not describe the post-it notes or the plate withheld at the table or the morning's mopping floors at 5 a.m. He did not perform his suffering for the audience. He simply said, "I never asked for credit. I never asked for gratitude. I asked for a plate of food in the house I built." He let that sit for exactly one breath. Then, if a man must earn the right to eat in the house he built with his own hands, then the people who made that rule have no place in it. Not shouted, not dramatic, just stated, like a foundation, like something load-bearing. He looked at Prescott. "You are my son. You will always be my son. But I am done being managed in my own home." Then he looked at Ravenna one final time. She was standing very still. "I want you out of this house by Sunday evening," he said. "Both of you. I will give you 30 days to find somewhere else. That is more grace than I was given at my own dinner table." He turned, walked to the back of the yard, sat down in the old wooden chair near the garden bed, the one he had built from leftover cedar, the one nobody ever sat in because it was too far from the party, and he folded his hands in his lap. And that was that. Brentwood Hale left first, quietly with a handshake to Aldous and a nod in Wendell's direction that carried more respect in it than anything that had been said all evening. The guests filtered out over the next 40 minutes, politely, carefully, the way people leave a space where something real has happened and they don't yet have language for it. Ravenna went inside. Prescott stood in the yard for a long time after everyone had gone, standing near the deck his father had poured in 104-degree heat, and stared at the cedar fence. He didn't approach his father. He didn't know how. Wendell sat in the wooden chair until the Houston sky went full dark and the live oaks along the fence line disappeared into silhouette. He could hear the neighborhoods settling around him. A dog 2 streets over, a car reversing out of a driveway, the distant thrum of 610 loop traffic that never fully stops. He was not angry. That was the thing that would have surprised people if they could have seen inside him. He was not triumphant either. He was not relieved, exactly. He was just present. For the first time in months, fully present in his own body, in his own house, under his own sky. He reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out a worn photograph. Delia, taken on the porch of the Beaumont house, 1987, young and laughing at something just off camera, wearing a yellow dress he still remembered the fabric of. "I kept it," he said quietly to the photograph, meaning the house, meaning himself. He put the photo back, went inside, made 2 pieces of toast, ate them standing at the counter in the kitchen, in the quiet. They were gone by Sunday. Ravenna had packed with the efficiency of someone who had been mentally prepared for an exit for longer than she admitted. 2 cars loaded by noon, not a word to Wendell directly. She walked past him in the hallway once, and her eyes did something complicated. Not quite guilt, not quite fury, something in the middle that had no clean name. And then she was gone. Prescott paused at the door. He looked at his father across the entryway. The same entryway Wendell had tiled himself, the small mosaic pattern near the threshold that spelled out nothing, just a design, just something beautiful for no reason. And he said, "I'm sorry, Dad." 2 words that were true and also nowhere near enough. Wendell nodded. "I know. I'll call you." Wendell said nothing to that. Prescott left. The house was quiet in a way it hadn't been in 4 years. Not empty quiet, lonely quiet, but the other kind. The kind that has room in it. The kind where a man can sit in his own living room without calculating whether he's taking up too much space. Aldous Fitch came by on Monday with a bag of groceries and a bottle of Shiner Bock and sat on the back deck for 2 hours talking about nothing important. The Texans' offensive line, a restaurant on Washington Avenue, whether Houston traffic had peaked or could somehow get worse. And Wendell laughed 3 times, genuinely, the way he hadn't laughed in longer than he could accurately remember. Colette Marsh from down the street knocked on the door on Wednesday with a casserole dish and an expression that said she had more to apologize for than she was ready to put into words. Wendell accepted the casserole, told her it smelled good, and invited her in for coffee. On Thursday morning, before sunrise, he heard movement on the front porch. He looked through the side window. Darnell. Backpack too large. Sitting on the bottom step. Wendell opened the door. The boy looked up. "Your eggs are better than the cafeteria," Darnell said. Wendell stood back from the door. "Get in here, then." 6 months later. A Tuesday, early February, the kind of Houston winter day that can't decide if it's cold or not, so it just sits at 51 degrees and drizzles. The intersection of Westheimer and Sage Road, afternoon traffic. A man in a grey sedan. Not a black Escalade, not anymore. sat at a red light with his window cracked, listening to nothing. Prescott Croft had a new job, regional account manager at a mid-sized logistics company. Not bad work, honest work. The kind he'd never thought he'd be doing at 34, and also, if he was being truthful with himself, in the particular honest way that only Tuesday afternoons in drizzle allowed, the kind that required him to be exactly who he was, with nothing borrowed from anyone else's address or anyone else's construction. He and Ravenna had separated in December, quietly, no announcement, the kind of ending that doesn't have a moment, just a gradual acknowledgement that the story had been over for a while. He was stopped at the light on Westheimer when he saw the truck. An old red Chevy Colorado. His father's truck. The one Wendell had owned for 11 years and refused to replace because, in his words, a truck that still runs is a truck that still works. It was in the left turn lane 40 feet away. Prescott could see his father's profile through the driver's window, the wide forehead, the set of the jaw, the way he held the wheel. 2 hands, easy, like a man with somewhere to be and no reason to rush. There was a boy in the passenger seat. Small, big backpack, saying something that made Wendell throw his head back and laugh. Prescott's chest did something that had no comfortable name. He raised his hand instinctively before he decided toward the window. The light changed. His father's truck turned left. Wendell hadn't seen him. Prescott sat at the green light for 2 full seconds, the car behind him not yet honking, the world giving him exactly 2 seconds of mercy. And he thought about the entryway tile, the mosaic pattern, the crown moulding, the cashier's check, the loan, the 2 pieces of toast eaten standing alone in a kitchen at midnight. He drove. And that's the story of Wendell Croft. Not a superhero, not a saint, just a man who built something real, gave without a ledger, stayed quiet too long, and when the moment finally came, chose to be himself rather than perform his anger. He didn't destroy his son. He didn't chase revenge. He just told the truth in his own house, in his own jacket. And let the truth do what truth always does when you finally stop apologizing for it. The house on Glenhurst Lane still stands. The deck is still level. The crown moulding is still straight. And every Thursday morning before school, a 9-year-old boy named Darnell sits at the kitchen table in that house and eats scrambled eggs made by a man who decided a long time ago that the most powerful thing he could do with pain was make sure someone else didn't have to feel it. If that's not legacy, I don't know what is. If this story moved you, if Wendell reminded you of someone real in your life, hit like right now. Share this video with one person who needs to hear it. Subscribe so you don't miss the next story. And drop a comment below. What would you have said at that party? I want to know. See you in the next one. And so, the end.